Growing up in Britain back in the mid-20th century meant living in a world that looked and felt very different from the one we know today. A world captured forever in those old family albums tucked away in cupboards and sideboards, where every photograph seems to contain a face that looks far older than the age written neatly on the back. There is something strangely haunting about seeing a man on his 30th birthday who appears closer to 50, or a woman celebrating her 40th who looks old enough to be a grandmother several times over. And what makes it even more fascinating is that this wasn't unusual, it was normal. Entire generations seem to age more quickly, not because of genetics or fate, but because of the world they lived in, the lives they led, and the weight they carried every single day. This is the story behind those faces: the clothes, the work, the diets, the habits, the expectations, the hardships, the sun, the smoke, the stress, and the culture that shaped an entire nation into looking older than their years. And it begins with the memory almost every child from the era shares. Number 1. Why children thought every adult was ancient. There was a particular kind of childhood perspective in those decades that made adulthood feel like one single category, a steep cliff rather than a gentle hill. Children saw adults as older, more serious, and more distant than anything we recognize now. A mother in her early 30s seemed middle-aged. A father not yet in his 40s looked and acted like a man approaching retirement. Teachers, even the young ones, felt ancient from the moment they walked into the classroom with a stern face and a sensible cardigan. Part of it was the way adults carried themselves. They rarely relaxed, they rarely dressed down, they rarely let themselves be playful or silly in front of children. Life was a set of responsibilities, and those responsibilities shaped how they spoke, how they walked, how they dressed, and how they behaved. Adults didn't look youthful because they weren't expected to. They stepped out of adolescence and straight into a world that demanded maturity, and that seriousness etched itself into their faces in ways children never forgot. Number 2. The clothes that added decades instantly. Post-war Britain wasn't a place where fashion tried to make anyone look young. Clothes were practical, sturdy, plain, and often handed down through families. Men lived in heavy wool suits, stiff collars, polished shoes, and thick overcoats that made even young adults look like senior office staff. Casual wear barely existed outside of the most relaxed weekends, and even then it usually consisted of trousers and button shirts that would seem formal by today's standards. Women dressed in fitted frocks, cardigan sets, skirts below the knee, and foundation garments designed to smooth and shape rather than flatter or liberate. Hairstyles were set in curls or perms that gave everyone an air of maturity. Even teenagers looked older than their age because youth fashion barely existed until the mid-60s. Before that, young people dressed like small adults, and adults dressed like older adults. Clothing didn't just cover the body, it aged it. Number 3. The smoking that aged a whole nation. One of the most striking differences between then and now is the sheer scale of smoking. It was everywhere. The blue-gray haze drifted through living rooms, pubs, buses, workplaces, cinemas, trains, cafes, and even hospital corridors. Doctors smoked while writing prescriptions. Teachers smoked in the staff room. Pregnant women smoked. Newlyweds smoked. Teenagers experimented behind bike sheds and were often caught by parents who smoked themselves. Tobacco touches every part of the face. It tightens blood vessels, dulls the skin, deepens wrinkles, and creates the unmistakable lines around the eyes and mouth that mark years of exposure. But no one knew the damage it caused. People thought nothing of lighting up a cigarette 20 times a day. It aged them without them realizing, turning young faces into older ones long before their time. Number 4. The sun damage nobody realized was happening. Britain may not be known for long hot summers, but when sunshine did appear, no one had any protection against it. Sunscreen was rare, and when it existed, it was more like thin lotion than proper protection. On top of that, the rise of cheap package holidays meant millions of pale Britons were suddenly roasting themselves on Spanish beaches without hats, shade, or any understanding of the harm the sun could cause. People believed a tan was healthy. Sunburn was just a bit of color. Builders, dock workers, delivery drivers, and farmhands spent their days exposed to UV rays with no barriers at all. Over years, that constant exposure created deep lines, leathery skin, and sunspots that made people appear much older. It was damage that built up slowly and silently, and old photographs capture it harshly and honestly. Number 5. The exhausted mothers who never stopped working. Housework in those decades was nothing like the light-touch tasks we know today. It was relentless, physical labor. Clothes were washed by hand or with primitive machines that still required wringing and hauling. Floors were scrubbed on hands and knees. Shopping involved carrying heavy bags from multiple shops, often pushing prams or dragging children along. Cooking meant preparing everything from scratch, peeling mountains of potatoes, chopping vegetables, and stirring pots for far longer than modern stoves require. Most women had larger families than today, often with several young children at once, and they rarely had a moment to rest. They aged not because they were ill, but because they were exhausted. The tiredness showed in their eyes, their posture, their expressions, and the seriousness that seemed to settle on their faces long before middle age. Number 6. The teeth that made people look older early. Dental care was basic, expensive, and often avoided unless absolutely necessary. Many working-class adults reached their 30s with several missing teeth, large fillings, or partial dentures that subtly altered the shape of the mouth and made the face appear older. Dentures were common and often poorly fitted. Children grew up with tooth decay that followed them into adulthood, and smiles were often guarded or tight-lipped. In photographs, this translated into expressions that made people look older, more worn, and more serious than they truly were. Number 7. The hairstyles that shortened youth. Hairstyles were a clear sign of the cultural expectations of the time. From the moment adulthood began, hair was styled to look neat, respectable, and controlled. Men wore short, slicked hairstyles that made them look older than their years. Women, especially once married, often cut their hair shorter and set it into perms or structured curls, a mature look that instantly added age. Long, loose, youthful hair was uncommon outside of the later 60s, and even then, it was far from mainstream. Most adults embraced a look associated with their parents' generation, which only increased the sense that people looked much older than they truly were. Number 8. Heavy labor. Many men worked in jobs that would be considered punishingly hard today. Coal mines, shipyards, steelworks, railways, factories, construction sites. These were environments filled with dust, fumes, dangerous machinery, and long hours of physical strain. Shoulders stooped from years of lifting, hands hardened, faces weathered. Even office workers were more active than modern desk workers. There were no computers, no emails, no ergonomic chairs. Everything involved movement, walking, carrying, standing, filing, fetching, climbing stairs, and manual processes that used the body all day long. Number 9. The diets that lacked the nutrients we now take for granted. Although food gradually improved after rationing ended, the typical diet in many households was still heavy on potatoes, bread, boiled vegetables, small portions of meat, and limited fresh fruit. Vitamins were scarce. Fatty fish was not common inland, and salads were viewed more as decoration than a meal. Everything was cooked thoroughly, often for far too long, and many nutrients were lost in the process. Without the vitamins and minerals that help maintain healthy skin, hair, and overall vitality, people aged more quickly. The signs were subtle but noticeable: tired-looking skin, thinning hair, and faces that appeared older than their biological age. Number 10. The emotional weight carried by a generation shaped by war. Adults of the 1950s and 60s had memories of the Second World War that were vivid, immediate, and heavy. Many grew up during the Blitz, lived through rationing, lost family members, watched their cities bombed, or carried the stress of uncertainty into adulthood. Trauma leaves marks not only on the heart, but on the face. Even those born shortly after the war lived with parents who carried those burdens every day, shaping the atmosphere of their childhoods. Hardship was normal, worry was constant, and financial insecurity was ever present. Such emotional weight ages people quietly but unmistakably. Number 11. The unforgiving cameras that added 10 years on their own. Photography in those decades was brutally honest. Lenses were sharp, film was contrast-heavy, and lighting was rarely flattering. Portraits were serious, formal, and stiff because people didn't take snapshots casually. Photographs were occasions. Faces appear older in those images not only because of the expressions people wore, but because the technology captured every line, shadow, and crease without softening a thing. Black and white film emphasized texture and contrast, making every wrinkle appear deeper and every tired expression more dramatic. Modern filters, portrait modes, and digital smoothing make contemporary faces look far younger by comparison. The old cameras simply told the truth, even when the truth added 10 years. Number 12. The cold homes that weathered skin and spirits. Before central heating became common, British homes were cold for much of the year. Bedrooms were freezing, windows iced from the inside, and the only warm room was often the living room where the coal fire burned. Cold air dries the skin, tenses the body, and exhausts the face. People slept in hats, socks, and layers, and woke up stiff and shivering. The physical strain of living in a cold house carved its way into their expressions in ways we barely think about today. Number 13. The polluted air that left its mark. Mid-century Britain was filled with smoke, not just from cigarettes but from factories, chimneys, coal fires, and industrial pollution. Smog blanketed cities, coated clothes, dried out skin, and irritated eyes. People inhaled particles that aged them internally and externally, and the grime in the air settled on every street, every building, and every face. Clean air was a luxury few experienced. Number 14. The early responsibilities that aged people before their time. People married young, worked young, left school young, and took on adult obligations before they were truly adults. A man might be supporting a family at 21. A woman might have 3 children by 25. Life moved quickly and expectations were heavy. With responsibility came stress, and with stress came the subtle signs of early aging that show up in old family photos: tightened mouths, serious eyes, and the look of someone who has carried far too much, far too soon. Number 15. The serious routines and etiquette that made everyone look older. There was very little room for self-expression in those decades. People behaved formally in public, dressed properly for every outing, maintained reserved expressions, and rarely smiled broadly in photographs. Smiling for cameras wasn't yet a cultural norm. People posed seriously because photographs were precious and solemn. The result was a library of images where everyone looks older simply because no one allowed themselves to look relaxed or carefree. And yet, for all the reasons people looked older, the hard work, the cold houses, the sunburn, the smoking, the stress, the lack of nutrition, the heavy clothes, the unforgiving cameras, and the responsibilities that arrived far too early, there is something deeply admirable about those faces. They are faces shaped by resilience and determination, by the pride of looking after a home, by the weight of rebuilding a country, by the quiet strength of people who kept going no matter what life asked of them. Perhaps they didn't look older. Perhaps they simply lived more intensely, and the lines on their faces were marks of a life carried with courage. Which of these memories surprised you the most? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep these stories alive.